now. Okay. Hi everyone. Um, Thanks for attending. We're going to be doing day 3 today. So let's start off with reviewing loops a little bit and then going into how to iterate through data structures. So let's look at a basic for loop example again. So does anyone want to try this out? Name the 3 parts of a for loop. You don't need to know their exact names, but basically in my for loop, what 3 parts should I have? And what do they do? If you guys want to try, you can put it in the chat or you can unmute. Okay, so we want the declaration of our iterator variable here. So this is during our for loop, this variable is going to be changed each iteration. So we're using let because we're declaring it. Make sure that you do declare it here. And then we're going to give it an initial value. Then next we're going to say, what's the stopping condition for this for loop? So let's say this for loop will stop once, so this for loop will stop once this condition is not true. So once I is actually greater than 5, then it'll stop. And we separate these with semicolons. And then finally, we'll say after each iteration, which is like one time the for loop runs, what should happen to I? So we're saying I should increase by 1, which is what this plus plus operator does. So then what we can do is we can try this console.log I. And we'll see first I is 0, then finally I is 4, but then once I becomes 5, then this condition is false, and then the loop stops. So applying this same principle, let's look at how we can iterate through an array. So if you have an array here, and let's give it some elements. So let's say true is a Boolean. They're basically either true or false. They're used for conditional logic. So can someone tell me, how do we access the length of an array? Does anyone remember that? How can you figure out how long an array is? Once again, you can put this in the chat too if you want. Yeah, this was a little while back. So let's quickly go over it. So let's do this again, or we'll first start off with the length. So to get the length of an array, it's pretty simple. You just do the name of the array dot length, and this dot really means that length is a property of array. It belongs to array. So if we do this, this is a little confusing. Multi-line comments look like this. We get that this array is 3 long. That makes sense. Now it is 4 long. So here's an approach for going through each element of an array. We can start off with I equal to 0. Then we can do less than array.length. And we can do I plus plus. So what is this doing? We're doing the same for loop we had before, but this time our stopping condition is when I is actually greater than the length of the array. So if we console.log this, what we're going to get, and I comment this out, we're going to get all of the indexes of this array, like this 1 is at the 0th index, below is at the 1st, true is at the 2nd, 3 is at the 3rd, and then that makes sense. So we're just, the length of the array is 4, so we know that the for loop will go through 1, 2, 3. So now, here's another thing we could do. This is how we access each element of an array. So see, I just printed out all the elements in this array by incrementing, using a for loop with I, and then accessing each element of this array at that index. So this is actually useful. Here's another thing we could do. So now we know how to iterate through data structures. We know we can modify an element at an array at an index like this, so array index, and you could set it to a new value. So what if we set it to its original value times 2, and I'm just going to change all of these elements to numbers. So let's console.log our array. And now our array is 2, 4, 6. Because we're going through the array for each index, we're saying for each index, the element at that index is now equal to the original value times 2. So this is something you can experiment with. We'll go into this more later. But that's how array iteration basically works. And then for objects, we won't go over this now. As long as you get the basic concept that you're creating a for loop which goes to the indexes, and then you're accessing elements of the data structure by the index, then you should be fine. But yeah, we'll go into this stuff when we need it. And then these are just fancier ways of doing it. So like if you want access to just the value, you just want to skip over the indexes like we're doing here, you can use the for of loop, and then similar thing for objects. Okay, let's do a quick practice problem with for loops before we move on, and then also while loops. We covered that last time. We can do a review of that later. Okay, so for loops, what you have to do, find all of the factors of a number. So actually this one can get a little complex, so we'll show the solution as well. But basically what you need to create a for loop, which given a number like 9, it is going to find all of the factors of 9. So like the answer should be 1, 3, 9. So let's talk about the approach, and you guys try coding this along. But what should this look like? Does anyone have any ideas of how we can make a factors program? Okay, has anyone ever made something like this? You wouldn't mind sharing to help us all out. Okay, so what we'll first start off with doing is, let's say if the number is 9, then here are the numbers that could be factors. All of the numbers from 1 up till 9. So all of those could be factors of 9. So we have to consider those. So we can start off with the for loop. So our for loop will now start at 1. That's the first number we want to check. I can even make this n for number. And then we're going to have n less than, let's have a number like const, number, like this is the number we're checking. So we're going to get the factors of 9. So we could do n less than number, but we would also want it to check 9, so we could do less than or equal to numbers. So it's going from 1 all the way to 9, and all of the numbers in between. Okay, and then at each iteration, does anyone remember how we can see if one number is divisible by the other number? I'll give you a hint. It involves the modulus operator.
If modulo equals 0.
Nice. So what would our code look like here if we want to see if number is divisible by n?
If number mod n equals 0.
Perfect. Okay, so number mod n equals 0. But what we could just start off with doing is we could log that number. So let's see what we get. We get 139. We put in 90. We get 1, 2, 3. We get all the factors. That's great. Then let's work with arrays as well. We'll leverage our array knowledge. So if I do const factors, I have an empty array. What we can do is we can, to add an element to an array, we can use dot push, the name of the array dot push. We're going to add n, and then same thing, but at least we're creating an array of all of our factors now. So you can see now we have this array. And we could try, let's try 100 now. So yeah, you can see this is nice. So this is just a pretty, this is just shows you how you can use for loops. And this is a lot of times your code will look like this. You have a for loop, you have some conditional logic inside. So with that, let's go into functions. Jerry, would you like to explain functions?
So we covered a bit about functions last time. They take an input and produce an output, or they just take an input, perform an action, and they may or may not produce an output. So they're a lot like functions in math, except they could be more complex because they're defined with the code you write. So a function will always execute that code you define in it with the inputs you give. So here we have an example of add, which takes two inputs A and B. So you define a function with the function keyword that's highlighted in blue. Then you put the name of the function and then the two parentheses. And inside of those parentheses, you put all of the arguments the function takes, its inputs. So here we have the arguments A and B, which means the function will take these two inputs. And then we have curly brackets, which we do whenever we define a block. And here we just have the return statement, which means give an output. So here we output A plus B. And to call this function in our code, you don't need the function keyword. You just write the name of the function along with any of the inputs you want to give it. So this code will print add, will first assign result to the output of add, which is 3 plus 4, which is 7, and then it will console log that. So this code will output 7.
Nice, and we can quickly take a look at that right now. So I won't delete it, but I'll just comment it. This may not work, let's see.
It doesn't work with the comments you have inside.
Yeah, you're right, you can't have a multi-line comment inside another multi-line comment. Okay, so we'll paste this here, and we get 7, and you can try changing the inputs and you get different outputs. That's what makes functions so versatile. You can code one thing and then call it with as many different parameters as you want, or inputs. So yeah, Jerry already explained this.
I already explained that. Oh yeah, functions don't, the return just tells the function to return one value, and after the return statement is executed, that completely exits the function. So even if you have code after return, it won't be called. And in functions, you don't only have to have a return. You don't have to have a return statement at all, in which case it won't return anything. And also you can have code other than the return statement.
Yeah, so let's go into, so first we'll give you one more example of a function that does not actually return anything. So we could actually, did I have an example? Okay, let's make a function. So we have console.log, right? So let's make a function called superlog, and you give it a message, and then you give it a number of times to output something, and then what it'll do is we have our for loop knowledge, so we'll have for I equals 0, I less than times. This is the number of times we want it to execute, so the loop will run that many times. And each of those times, we will console.log the message. So no, we're not returning anything. We're creating a function that performs a task. So if I do hello, then I will get, let me see what I did here. Oh, I didn't give it a number of times to do this. Okay, so let's do 5. So we get hello 5 times. We get hello 1 time. Then note, when I didn't include times, the def times is getting like an undefined value that loop isn't running. Here's a cool thing you can do. For your last parameter, like this won't work all the time, but you can set a default value for that parameter. So you see I put times equals 1. So now by default, if I don't provide a value for times, it'll be 1. The reason I say this won't work every time is like you can't do message equals 1 and then times because if times isn't included, then how do I explain this? Like if you don't include times, then the function, oh yeah, okay, the first value doesn't need a default function value.
Rohan, I think
Yeah.
you can actually do superlog, comma, and then 6. So like just omit the first
Comma,
parameter.
okay.
Comma, and
Let's
then
see.
like the times, right? Or
You know
maybe,
what? Okay, so it has an undefined value. Okay. You know what?
okay, this
Maybe
doesn't work yet. It's like a feature in Node 14, I think.
if you give it, okay, you know what? This is a little off topic, but the point is use default functions, use default values when they do work. So message times. So yeah, that's all good. We can skip this. Let's have you practice doing functions. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to take this code, so let me extend this. Take this code we had here for factors, and I'd like you all to turn it into a function where given a parameter called number, you're going to return an array of all of the factors. So I would like you all to try that, and then if you have any solutions, you can put your link in the chat. Okay, nice. Atticus, no, not Atticus. Alex has a solution. We'll go check that out. Okay. I'm wondering why something's being outputted, Alex, because I don't see any console.log.
REPL implicit logs the last thing that's evaluated.
Sorry, what was the thing you said, Jerry?
REPL implicitly logs the last thing that's evaluated.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that brings me so perfect. This is great, John. It's great, Alex. Note that return doesn't automatically log something. So it just gives you a value, but it doesn't output it. So then what you should do here is just make sure your console.logging factors 9, factors 25, so you can see it. Yeah, great job here. Yeah, so we can see how functions really streamlined our code. What we had before was just, we had to create a variable, we had this code. So like if we wanted to find another factor, we may have had to copy over all of that code. But here we can just create one function and then call it with different inputs. And so this just gives you one more example, the use of functions. We'll skip arrow functions for now. When we go to callbacks, we'll look at that. Atticus, do you want to quickly explain some math in JavaScript?
Sure. So let's talk about math in JavaScript. So obviously math and programming are very related. So JavaScript actually comes with a pre-packaged math library to help you. And it's an object, so you access properties with a dot. And these properties are either constants or functions, which are useful in math. So here are some examples. Math.py is constant 3.14. Math.floor, it rounds it down. It's like the floor function in mathematics, which rounds down to the nearest integer. Math.random produces a random integer between 0 and 1. I mean, no, a random float between 0 and 1. And we also have have several functions. So round is similar to floor, but it just rounds to the nearest integer. So for example, 6.89 rounds to 7. Pow is power. A lot of people make the mistake of using a caret as power, because caret is a symbol in mathematics, but you shouldn't use caret in JavaScript because that's something different, so you should use power instead. The square root takes the square root of the number. Abs, it stands for absolute value, so the absolute value of minus 4 is 4. Ceiling is the opposite of floor, so whereas floor rounds down, ceiling rounds up, so the ceiling of 3.56 is 4, and the floor goes with ceiling. Sign, that's from trig. Max, well, max returns the larger of the two numbers, and max goes with min, so max returns the larger, and min returns the lesser of the two numbers. Random, we've seen this before, but it returns a random float between 0 and 1, and e is Euler's constant, which is 2.17. So I think that basically explains math.
Yeah, and you all can try that out here. Like, here's one example. You can, oh, sorry, Alex, this is your thing. Okay, so console.log math, you can do math.py. This is an example of a property of this object, and then here's a method. So properties are like just data, and then methods are like functions. So math.random will give us just a random number between 0 and 1. 0 inclusive, 1 exclusive. We'll explore how you can use this in your code. So yeah, I encourage you to try this all out. You can always review from these slides. Now, here's what we're gonna do. In our club challenge, we have primes here. So using what we taught you today, and the factor stuff might be pretty relevant, I would like you all to create a solution for both of these problems by yourself, and then at the beginning of our next meeting, you can put your links in the chat and we'll take a look at your solutions. I encourage you use a function for both of these. And then also, if you have, you will solve this and then look at how you can optimize your code as well. Yeah, and then if you guys want, also try out the warm-up. This one's a little more optional. If enough people want the solution next time, we will give you the solution for that.
If any of you like are stuck, I have a template for this problem, and
Cool, okay.
and I can give you the template. So let me post a link to the template in the chat.
And you know what, Atticus, later, if you, why don't you put the template on our website under this problem so people can access it there. Okay, I'm gonna stop share recording.